Hey there, interwebs, and welcome back to Russell's Guide to Monsters. Today we're going to take a look at griffins. Again. I know I've talked about them a few times before, and I'm sure I'll mention them again in the future, but I'm returning to the subject today because I wanted to make one good categorical video, and while working on it I had a startling realization. Before I can say what it was, however, we must first ask a very important question. What is a griffin? At a basic level, I would say that it's a mythical creature created by taking a lion, or other big cat in some modern depictions, and giving it the body parts of a raptor, i.e. a bird of prey, either in addition to or in place of the corresponding feline parts. Does this mean that a winged lion is a kind of griffin? What about the Tatar Akbars, the Egyptian Hyraca Sphinx, or certain modern manticore depictions? It seems to me that we need a narrower definition, one which encapsulates what the name originally meant. Sometimes the meaning of a creature's name is built right into it. For example, the Ophiotaurus was a combination of a snake and a bull, which is literally what Ophiotaurus means, and unicorn means one horn, referring to the beast's most distinctive feature. Unfortunately, no one's 100% certain where the name griffin comes from or what it means. One theory posits that it comes from the ancient Greek word grypos, meaning hooked and referring to the shape of its beak, while others claim that it comes from a Semitic source, noting the similarity to the Hebrew word for cherub, which, as a reminder, looked like this and may have taken inspiration from the Akkadian shedu or lamassu. If we go with the former theory about a hooked beak, that implies that the griffin has to have the head of a bird, and therefore a winged lion, for example, does not qualify as one. Additionally, while we're discussing names and their etymology, I want to point out that just about all of the creatures which I'm going to mention in this video predate standardized spelling, and many come from languages that don't use the English alphabet. This means that many of them have multiple names, and even the ones which have only a single name may still have multiple accepted spellings thereof. Other times, the same name or spelling can refer to multiple very different creatures. As a prime example of both issues, the word griffin has three commonly accepted spellings: Gryphon, Griffin, and Griffon. In addition to the aquiline lion hybrid, the last spelling is also a breed of dog and a type of vulture. Since starting with a broad definition raised more questions than it answered, let's start with a narrow scope and work our way outwards. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who will say this isn't a true griffin. It's even known as the classical griffin. It has the body of a lion with the wings, taloned forelimbs, and head of an eagle, and external ears if you want to get into specifics. The ancient Egyptian creature known as an axix replaces the eagle parts with those of a hawk instead, and it is typically depicted with a crest of 3 feathers atop its head. The other major way in which it differs from the classical or true griffin is in its forelimbs. They are those of the lion, not the raptor. Another traditional griffin variant with all 4 leonine paws is the Ophinicus, also known as the Epimaku or Epimachus, possibly from Ophiomachus, Greek for snake fighter. While its forelimbs are the feature which most typically distinguishes it from the classical griffin, it also has a longer neck and a short tail, like a camel. Some creatures identified as an Ophinicus also have a snake for a tail, a feature more commonly seen on chimeras, and more on that in a moment, but most depictions go with a more natural caudal appendage. Not all griffins of antiquity had wings, however. Later depictions of the Ophinicus, for example, sometimes show it without them. One of the oldest types of wingless griffin is the Minoan Griffin. Like the Ophinicus, it also has the forelimbs of a lion, and like the axix, it has a crest of feathers atop its head. Rather than any aspect of its physiology, however, its most notable feature may be its habitat, Minoan Crete. Of course, these days we associate the location more strongly with a different creature with the head of one animal on the body of another, but Minoan griffins are much more closely tied to their homeland than minotaurs. Beyond its borders, the Cretan creatures usually go by other names such as Demigriffs. It should be noted, however, that that term is a modern invention. A wingless griffin may also be blazoned as an alke in late and post-medieval heraldry, spelled with either a C or a K. Another type of wingless griffin is the Chthong, which retains the taloned forelimbs and is distinguished by the projections radiating from its body. Depending on the source, this feature can variously represent anatomical elements like spines or quills, rays of light, or possibly even stink lines. Seriously. In the Big Cat Mix-Up, we discussed how the name panther can refer to a number of real-life creatures, ranging from cougars to melanistic leopards and jaguars, to any member of the Panthera genus or the entire Pantherinae subfamily. What we care about today, however, are the mythical panthers, of which there are 2 primary groups. The first treats the name as though it comes from Greek for all animals. It doesn't. And these panthers frequently have an equine body with a long neck, horns, and hooves or a raptor's talons. The other kind is much more feliform, being a big cat covered in multicolored spots and which emits a sweet-smelling fragrance. Possibly related is the heraldic pantheon. In addition to the suspiciously similar name, it's also a quadrupedal combination of features from various animals, typically a hind with the tail of a fox, strewn with colorful markings. In addition to this star-spangled cervid, some scholars believe that the heraldic panther also evolved into the Kithong, due to attempts at representing its characteristic odor and artwork later being mistaken for spikes. If this is true, it would mean that Kithongs aren't actually griffins, but they're also known in Blazon as male griffins. That opens up a whole nother can of worms about sexual dimorphism, which I've already covered before, and I'll return to it in a moment. Another griffin relative which is neither true griffin nor a demigriff is the hippogryph, and when I say griffin relative, I mean that in the family way. That's because a hippogryph is the hypothetical offspring of a griffin and a horse. I use the word hypothetical because, according to classical mythology, griffins prey on horses, so the likelihood of the two species conceiving a child together is basically nil. Nevertheless, this hasn't stopped hippogriffs from becoming a staple species of modern fantasy works, and one of these aquiline mules can be identified by essentially being a classical griffin with all of the leonine parts being replaced by the corresponding parts of a horse. By my math, this makes it half griffin, half horse, and doubly fictitious. A separate mythological creature which is sometimes misidentified as a hippogriff is the winged horse, due to their shared features. The correct generic name for one of these creatures is a Terepas, which is just Greek for winged horse, but most laypeople these days would call one a Pegasus if they aren't mistaking it for a hippogriff, from which it's differentiated by its lack of an avian head and forelimbs. Technically speaking, Pegasus was a Terepas, but the name started out as a proper noun. Some depictions also add the horn of a unicorn or monoceros to Pegasus, but that would make him a different creature known as a Caraptor, meaning a hornwing. If you're looking for headcanon additions, perhaps Caraptors could be the offspring of a unicorn and a Terepas, or a griffin and a unicorn instead of a mundane horse, although the latter pairing would produce the wrong forelimbs. Regardless of what names you use, none of these are griffins, nor are they meaningfully related, just commonly confused. Just as how the hippogriff eschews leonine hindquarters for the back half of yet another animal, so too does the sea griffin. This creature's posterior portion is a fishtail, and although it's limited pretty exclusively to heraldry, classical mythology gave us plenty of other fish-tailed quadrupeds, such as the Leocampus and Hippocampus. The sea griffin could easily be viewed as a griffin which uses a Leocampus in place of a lion, or as a sea hippogriff produced by the mating of a griffin and a hippocampus instead of a horse. It may be strange, but I'm willing to place the sea griffin within the true griffin family. With that, I'd now like to set griffins aside for a moment to discuss another class of mythical animals, sphinxes. They too possess leonine bodies with distinctively non-leonine heads, such as the ram-headed criosphinx, and sometimes they have wings as well. Easily the most famous sphinx is the Sphinx. You know the one at Giza. The second most famous is probably the Sphinx of Thebes, which is where the entire connection between sphinxes and riddles comes from. These two sphinxes are an androsphinx and a gynosphinx, meaning male sphinx and female sphinx, respectively. Regardless of gender, both have human heads, and I suspect that they're not as different as you probably think. The biggest difference, which I focused on in the sexual dimorphism video, is the presence or absence of wings. Gynosphinxes usually have them, but sometimes they don't, while androsphinxes can go either way. Now, you may say that male sphinxes don't have wings, but tell that to the Persians because they beg to differ. Persian mythology also gives us the previously discussed manticore. Both it and the Persian sphinx have the head, or at least the face, of a man on the body of a lion, and while modern depictions frequently add wings which the original manticore never had, Persian androsphinxes had wings, contrary to what the Egyptian variety has popularized. The manticore also has a venom-injecting tail, which brings me to my next point. I have previously claimed on this very series that gynosphinxes sometimes have serpent-headed tails, but upon further consideration I'm ready to retract that statement. Sure, you may see them depicted that way in modern art, but the only support I found for it is an uncited claim on Wikipedia. I believe that whoever wrote it was basing the idea on this image, but the face on that tail could easily be explained as minor weathering, and no other similar depictions of Greek gynosphinxes use snake tails. And then I found this Hittite sphinx, which undeniably has a head at the end of its tail. In an ironic twist, however, I believe that this creature is an androsphinx. There's also this depiction, which retains the original lion head, placing it on the chest, and makes the head on the tail more avian by giving it a distinct hooked beak. In some ways, it reminds me of the classical Greek chimera, a mix-and-match monster with the body of a lion that isn't a sphinx. Sure, it possesses a caprine head like a criosphinx and a snake-headed tail, but these similarities are merely coincidental. The chimera's lineage starts and ends with being the offspring of Typhon and Echidna. As a quick side note, I also find it amusing that she was undeniably female, according to the sources, but artists won't stop giving her a mane, because lion equals mane in society's collective consciousness. Of course, they won't stop giving her wings, either. Getting back to the original sphinxes, Hyracosphinxes are avian variants, possessing the head of a hawk, and the sock is essentially a Hyracosphinx with a lotus flower on the end of its tail. Unfortunately, the information I was able to find about this strange and mysterious creature was quite limited and of questionable veracity, but it seems to be quite a lot like the Axix and Hyraca Sphinx, as all three are hawk-headed leonine hybrids from ancient Egypt. Some claim that the Sak also has the hind legs of a horse, which brings the Hippogryph back to mind, but it's usually still depicted with all four paws of a lion. I've also seen it claimed that all Saks are female, since every depiction gives them lactating teats. All minor physiological quirks aside, these avian sphinxes are how griffins re-enter the picture. You see, the only substantial difference between the Hyraca Sphinx and the Axix, which most people will accept as a griffin variant, is that the latter has wings, but wings demonstrably aren't a requirement to be a griffin. The Minoan Griffin, which is so commonly accepted as a griffin that it's right there in the name, is just a lion with the head of an eagle. You could call it an Aeto Sphinx, Greek for eagle sphinx, because really, it's just a Hyraca Sphinx with the head of a different raptor. Given that there are variants of both griffins and sphinxes, with and without wings, I don't think they can be said to be a defining feature of either group, nor can they be used to differentiate the two. A lion with the head of a lion is obviously just a lion, and winged lions are usually called just that, but I've also seen them very incorrectly referred to as griffins. I now wonder if either or both could also be called the Leo Sphinx. That's a rhetorical question, but it leads me to another. What does the name Sphinx actually mean? Once again, we don't know for certain. Some claim that it's a back formation from the ancient Greek word sphingein, meaning to squeeze or bind, see also sphincter, and means the strangler, referring to how lions kill their prey by seizing the throat. Historian Susan Wise Bauer, however, suggests that it was a Greek corruption of the Egyptian name Shesepunk, which meant living image, and referred to the statue of the Sphinx. I guess we're 0 for 2 on helpful names today. If we go with the strangler hypothesis, that ties sphinxes directly to lions, and we can then build upon that base to better categorize not only sphinxes, but griffins as well. Since that's the whole point of this video, I'm going with that theory. Earlier, when I wanted to find the adjective for the chimera's goat head, it's caprine by the way, I went looking specifically for the clade which includes goats and sheep, because rams are uncastrated male sheep, not goats. I learned to my surprise, however, that sheep are simply a subset of the goat subfamily Caprinae. To be fair, domestic goats and sheep belong to separate genera, Aves and Capra if you're wondering, but sheep are just one branch of the overall goat family. I bring it up because I believe griffins and sphinxes have a similar relationship, and I'll give you a moment to recollect your socks, which I imagine I've just blown off. Think about it, though. The name Sphinx may come from strangler, as a sort of kenning for a lion, since every sphinx has the body of one. Although we don't know the origin of the name griffin either, the two best theories claim it describes the hook shape of its beak, or link it to Hebrew cherubim and the Assyrian lamassu, which are themselves closely tied to sphinxes. If we go with that first theory, it means Sphinx describes the body and Griffin describes the head, neither being mutually exclusive to the other. Sometimes sphinxes have wings and sometimes they don't, and occasionally they have other animal parts, particularly serpentine tails, but they always have the body of a lion and the head of another animal, which is sometimes a bird. Since all griffins have leonine bodies with the heads of birds, hippogriffs and sea griffins being special exceptions, I feel comfortable saying that they may as well be considered an avian subtype of sphinx. Additionally, Egyptian and Mesopotamian sphinxes were also symbolic of nobility, often sporting the heads of pharaohs or Assyrian kings, and the griffin was a similar medieval symbol of nobility, since the eagle and lion were considered the kings of birds and beasts. To sum up, there's no question that classical griffins are griffins, obviously, and the Ophiuchus is generally considered to be one as well. Demigriffs like the Minoan Griffin, Alke, and Kithong also usually get a pass, at least as close relatives. Hippogryphs aren't griffins, but are the offspring of them, and are unrelated to other winged horses like Caraptors or Pegasus. The Axix may be considered a griffin or a winged Hyraca Sphinx, because all griffins should really just be counted as avian sphinxes. That's my theory anyway. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below, and if you've got any theories of your own. I'd also like to add that the final script for this video came in at about 10 pages double-spaced, but I've got roughly another 7 which I decided to cut for being too tangential. I've still got the material though, so keep your eyes peeled for a deleted scenes video later this month. Until then, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.